Hello and welcome to this new short discussion where I discuss some articles which I personally find very interesting and not often kind of ignored or at least unknown. So in this video, the article I would like to discuss is this. So let's put a little bit of context. The article was published in Studies in History and Philosophy of Modern Physics. It's essentially philosophy of physics paper that delves into some of the mathematical aspects and also the physics aspects. So it's very relevant, to be honest, to physicists. Now, the title is Conceptual Problems in Classical Electrodynamics, Normal Toils and Trouble by Mathias Frisch. Now, the thing is, I need to put a little bit of context because this article is a sort of reply to some people who have criticized his earlier work from 2006 and onwards. Okay, so the paper was published in 2013, and essentially this is following up about 7 years of kind of debate and stuff like that. So just to give a bit of context before I move on, as I said, Matthias Frisch has published like in around 2006 or so, perhaps a bit before. He has published various philosophical and conceptual critique of classical electrodynamics. And in particular, because there are multiple points being raised, one of the points being raised is that if we actually use the electrodynamic theory um, with discrete charges, which is often the case, and in fact there is also similarly experimental evidence that charges do come in packets, um, then if we do that, we end up with the problem that we are bound to use the theory in an inconsistent fashion. Okay, so essentially the claim is that the classical electrodynamic theory, and in fact that applies and extends to the quantum version of electrodynamics, essentially is not logically consistent, and this is obviously a problem. So in the article here, he replies to a particular critique being made related to the so-called Abraham model. I'm not going necessarily to go into this particular detail. You can be free, sorry, to actually have a look. The article reads quite well, to be honest, because if you have had any kind of exposure to electromagnetism, then you can really read it very easily. It's in plain English for most of the time, and so in principle, you know it's fairly straightforward to read. But I wanted to highlight some paragraphs here perhaps to whet your appetite. Here, this is a quote by Feynman. So this tremendous edifice, which is such a beautiful success in explaining so many phenomena, ultimately falls on its face. When you follow any of our physics too far, you'll find that you always get into some kind of trouble. Now, we want to discuss a serious trouble, the failure of classical electromagnetic theory. You can appreciate that there is a failure of all classical theory because of the quantum mechanical effect. Classical mechanics is a mathematically consistent theory. It just doesn't agree with experience. It is interesting, though, that the classical theory of electromagnetism is an unsatisfactory theory all by itself. Okay, so that's kind of the problem when people talk about consistent or inconsistent. You need to have a so-called internal consistency, and you may have perhaps an external inconsistency, but here that would have to be evaluated against whatever, some experimental outcomes and so on. Okay, so I think that's the first point to be made here. Um, and then further in the same chapter, I think this is still relevant. We do not know how to make a consistent theory which does not produce an infinity for the self-energy of the electron, or any other point charge, kind of for that matter. And essentially, that's kind of the problem that is put forward here, and that is debated. So Zukovsky essentially has looked at a way to derive a non-infinite self-energy for the electron, or at least has argued for it. and here this particular paper is a reply about this. So one of the things is that what you're going to see is that the author is actually, kind enough to summarize his point on what is a problem, etc. So here he kind of put forward in various places. Here, the conclusion I drew from my investigation, and that it takes to be compatible with Feynman and Jackson, is that first, classical particle field theory contains unsolved and perhaps unsolvable conceptual puzzles at its core, and second, the main approach to modeling particle field interactions, and he wants to insist here, the approach taught in advanced textbooks and used in any application of the theory to actual phenomena, and in fact that includes the proton orbits at the LHC in CERN, relies on an inconsistent set of assumptions. So that's a very, very strong claim to be made, and he has been building up various, lines of evidence to support these particular claims in the span of kind of 6-7 years. He has even written a whole book on this. Now, if you're interested about this as well, I've made a video that is, I think, on the channel that is called "Is it the end of physics?" And actually, I mention problems with classical theories, and one of them is actually described a bit more in detail here, and that's a point from Frisch, which I kind of put forward. So let me just get to the kind of bulk of the argument. So again, here there is this idea of the Abraham model as fundamental, which is argued against. Here he actually points some aspect of inconsistency and so on and so forth. Again, to be fair, most of it is actually easily readable, so I will leave you with it. If you want to read more, I will put the paper in the description. But one of the things I wanted to look at, I'm sorry, I'm a bit lost in. Yes, so that's the final, again, that's actually a sort of conclusion, but that is borrowed from a quote from somebody else. I have to say, I don't know how to say that name, Sponer, and that's the following. It is well known that classical electrodynamics is basically a continuum theory. Nevertheless, point charges are very often considered, even in the most elementary introductory lectures, sorry. Whenever a contradiction arises, the difficulty is then set aside, infinite quantities are discarded or renormalized, self-interaction terms in Lagrangians are ignored, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's kind of the idea here that is kind of put forward. And the main idea of the article here, summarizing all of these debates, is to basically say that a particular refutal or rebuttal of this particular viewpoint via the Abraham model of the electron actually doesn't do the job. Okay, so I'm going back to here the main title. If you want to have a look again, in the description I will put the actual link. If you've got any comments or questions on it, if you want, for example, that I go through some of the claims or derivation more specifically, by all means, do let me know.